Going on, AP government people, we have video number 13 for you. This one is on the development of political parties. We're going to talk about the first party system. Democrats, Whigs, Republicans. This is one of my favorite topics in the entire AP Gov curriculum. So let's get started. Okay, the first party system, we're going back to the 1790s up to and including 1824. Now let's start off with Washington's farewell address. He leaves office in March of 1797, and he warns against the formation of political parties and foreign alliances. In his farewell address, which was a letter, he's like, yo, these two things are bad. And the nation's first two parties emerged shortly after out of debates over foreign policy, specifically the French Revolution. So Washington, again, is like, yo, beware of foreign alliances and political parties. And the U.S. is like, nah, we're going to form our political parties anyway. So let's start off talking about the Federalists. These were led by this dude, Alexander Hamilton. Federalists tend to be pro-British. They were supported by merchants and wealthy, and they also favored a strong central government. They also favored an industrial society, a loose interpretation of the Constitution, and there was a heavy presence in the North, specifically New England. And the only president that was a Federalist was John Adams. Now, on the other end, we have the Republicans or the Jeffersonians. They're not the same as today's Democrats or Republicans. They were led by this dude, Thomas Jefferson, who was an arch nemesis of Hamilton, and they both were in Washington's first cabinet. They tended to be pro-French. They were supported by farmers. They favored a weaker national government, an agrarian society, and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. So Jefferson envisioned America as being like the backbone being farmers, and Hamilton's like, no, it's going to be industry. And we really today live more in Hamilton's vision than Jefferson's. Now, the Federalist Party is going to disappear in the early 1800s, leading to an era known as the era of good feelings, where there's one political party. And this is during James Monroe's presidency from 1817 to 1825. Now, let's jump over to the second party system from 1828 to 1856. We have the Democrats that really began with the election of this dude, Andrew Jackson, with the help of his Secretary of State and Vice President and future President, Martin Van Buren, who organized the Democratic Party and created a machine. The idea of political parties that we know today really dates back to Martin Van Buren. Now, Jackson advocated a rotation in office, or what his critics would say, the spoil system, that he appointed a whole bunch of political supporters. We see during this time the elimination of many voting requirements for white males throughout the country, and Democrats would be supported by farmers, urban workers, and immigrants, especially Irish immigrants. They were also against Henry Clay's American system that included the Bank of the United States, the building of infrastructure through internal improvements, and tariffs. Now, on the other end, we have the Whigs. This group was formed in response to King Andrew I, as they called him. Here's a very famous political cartoon. You see Andrew Jackson here, and in his hand, he vetoed the recharter of the Bank of the United States, and he vetoed it because he did not like it, not because he thought it was unconstitutional, because he did not like it. So many of his opponents began calling him a king. They supported Henry Clay's American system, the three parts that I just mentioned, and they would be supported by industrialists and wealthy planters, and also those that disliked Jackson. People like future President John Tyler, who used to be a Democrat, but then disliked Andrew Jackson, so he abandoned the Democrats. Let's jump on over to the Republican Party, which emerges in the 1850s. In particular in response to the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Now, their platform in the 1850s was the non-extension of slavery into the Western Territory, so in that land that was acquired during the time of Manifest Destiny. It was not to abolish slavery, but to keep it from spreading. Lincoln, when he became president, did not want to abolish slavery. He wanted to keep it from spreading. And this is similar to the ideas of the Free Soil Party. So who was the first president? You know it. It is Abe Lincoln. And other beliefs included they advocated high tariffs and the development of infrastructure or railroads. So similar economic goals as the Whigs from the 1830s and 40s. For the next 60 years after the Civil War, we'll see the Republicans really dominate much of the national government, although Democrats do have power at certain times as well. Democrats dominated political control in the South, and this was especially true in post-Reconstruction. The election of 1896, this is a milestone or a watershed election in U.S. history. You have on the Democratic side, William Jennings Bryan, who is also a Populist Party candidate, and he campaigned on free silver, or not just using the gold standard to back the value of the dollar, but also using silver. And he had his support by farmers. And on the other side, you see William McKinley and the Republicans. And he advocated for high tariffs and the gold standard. Now, Republicans, throughout much of U.S. history, want to raise tariffs. So you will see high tariffs for Republicans. Republicans raise. Now, here in the election, you see that William McKinley dominates in the North, and William Jennings Bryan dominates in the South. Remember, he's a Democrat, so he's going to win the South during this time. But much of the population, as you can see from the electoral votes of each state, is in the North. So William McKinley wins. And Republicans will remain in control until 1932. Now, there will be some Democratic presidents, but for the most part, the Republicans will dominate the presidency from after the Civil War until 1932. In the election of 1932, another milestone election, it is FDR here versus the incumbent Herbert Hoover, the Republican. And FDR overwhelmingly wins. Everything is pretty much in blue. That is FDR. And Hoover wins only a few states. So who supported FDR in 1932? Keep in mind, this is the heart of the Great Depression. You have labor unions, Southerners, Catholics, and those that lived in cities as well, so city workers, and African Americans. For the first time, we see African Americans in large numbers switching from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party because they benefited from the New Deal economic policies. Truman, JFK, LBJ, all the Democratic presidents that came after FDR continued with policies that either aligned with or extended the New Deal. Now, let's go to 1968 to the present day. Another watershed election is 1968. We have Richard Nixon versus Humphrey versus Wallace, who ran as a third-party candidate, the American Independent Party. Nixon came up with something known as a Southern strategy. He focused on states' rights, a strong military, and law and order. Keep in mind, 1968, we have the Vietnam War raging on and lots of civil rights protests. So he was trying to appeal to people in the South that supported the Vietnam War and were also weary of civil rights protests. And beginning with this election, the South began to vote Republican. So even though there are 5 states here that voted for Wallace, you see Nixon chipping away at the South, South Carolina and North Carolina and Florida. So this is going to be a turning point where the Republican Party begins to gain a lot of support from people living in the South. Okay, let's talk about third parties really quickly. Third parties typically focus on single issues, whether it's prohibition, marijuana, economics, etc., or they broke off from one of the major 2 parties. An example of this is Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive or Bull Moose Party in 1912 when he was fighting with William Howard Taft. And he ran in 1912 essentially as a Republican because he broke away from the Republican Party. Once their issues are adopted by one of the 2 major parties, those third parties then decline. All right, let's do a quick recap. Characteristics of Federalists. Know it as well as those of Jeffersonians. Democrats began with Jackson. The Whigs, what were their beliefs? The Republican Party platform originally. In the election of 1896 as a turning point, as well as 32. And who supported the New Deal. Be able to identify specific groups of people that supported the New Deal. And why was 1968 a turning point as well? For test tips, multiple choice, definitely know characteristics of different parties, including the supporters. Again, the elections of 1896, 1932, and 1968 as turning points. And for free response, in 2010, it addressed the supporters of both the Republicans and Democrats over time and how they shifted. All right, guys, look forward to seeing you right back here for video number 14, the effects of political parties on the political process. You know I can't have a video on the Whigs without having a picture of Henry Clay, so I saved him for the last slide here. I thank you guys for watching. Best of luck on all your tests, especially the big one in May. You all will do great. I thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.